Greetings. I'm Wolfram Alderson, and I'm here talking with Atif Javed today. But first, I'm going to give just a brief introduction to the issue we're talking about, which is refugees and displaced people on Earth. Estimated 68.5 million people on Earth today. Approximately 1 out of every 112 people are displaced. Sadly, our current president has moved to slash the 2017 number of refugees down to 50,000. And this year, I think in 2018, we've had the fewest number of refugees being accepted in the last 40 years. And 49 nations accept refugees at higher rates than we do. I'm a lifelong social change agent and artist. And during my career, I've worked with Cuban refugees and Guatemalan refugees about 16 years of my life. So I have a very strong connection to this issue. And I've worked with homeless populations here in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area. As Atif, as you know, and I think many others know, that the conversation about refugees and displaced people has often been exploited by the fear of others. And this is one reason why I've joined with a national organization called One Journey Festival, which holds a national festival in Washington, D.C. The next one's in June 2019. And their focus is really not a political one, but one that is about celebrating the achievements and accomplishments and cultures of refugees that have been such an important part of U.S. history. So that's why we're here today, and I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the conversation. But now I'd like you to introduce yourself, if you wouldn't mind, and share a little bit about you and the company Tarjimly, which you founded. And recently you've been recognized as a Forbes 30 Under 30 social entrepreneur. Might share that story a little bit. And we met recently at the One Journey Festival here in San Francisco. That's our connection. So I'll just let you take it from here and share a little bit about your story and your amazing organization.
Great, thanks so much, Wolfram. It's great to talk with you and see you. My story here took a big pivot around January 27th, 2017, when the newly elected president of the United States signed into law the travel ban. And so that, travel ban, whether you call it the refugee ban or the Muslim ban, however you want to sanitize it, was a big moment of realization for me, because I saw on my Facebook and Twitter feed that it was filled with calls for translators and interpreters at the airports. So I turned to my best friend and said, Aziz, this is it. We have to launch Tarjimly today. And Tarjimly means translate for me in Arabic. And it's an app that allows the world's 3 billion bilinguals to translate and interpret on demand for the 25 million refugees around the world. So my story goes even farther back, although I myself am not a refugee. My grandmother was a refugee. And she relied on me to interpret for her all the time. My family was actually scheduled to immigrate to the United States the week after 9/11. And so when we finally made it to Washington, D.C., that fear of brown-skinned Muslim immigrants was pretty palpable. But I think I was still luckier than my grandmother, who she used to tell me that at least people will judge you here after they hear you, instead of just after they see you, like me. And it was never like this matter of blatant policy until the travel ban hit. And I think that's what finally moved me. And as an American, as an immigrant, as a person of faith, I felt that whole system was wrong. And so when I looked back at my own life, I saw that the crutch I used to pull myself to MIT eventually and become an engineer in Silicon Valley was language. It was having a mastery in the English language. And for all its talent, Silicon Valley is still this massive bubble. My friends and I were tired of working on ad optimization. We were tired of making rich people's lives slightly more convenient. And most of all, we were tired of feeling helpless, watching pictures of Alan Kurdi and Syrian mothers who were suffering that looked just like my grandmother. Take our talent and basically give Silicon Valley a soul back in the work that it's doing. And so we volunteered in refugee camps in Greece and in Turkey, and we saw how refugees were trapped not just by borders, but by language barriers every single day. And so that's when we founded Tarjimly with the mission of improving humanitarian outcomes for refugees by eliminating language barriers completely. And so when we launched in 24 hours after launching, the day after the travel ban, 3,000 people signed up. And I think it's because people were excited by the idea of being able to help a refugee right from their phone. And there's people like me from the immigrant community, from the diaspora community, who want a way to actually give back that's easier and more convenient and, can actually mobilize millions of people around the world. So that's what we were trying to do with Tarjimly.
You did found the organization as a nonprofit, I believe?
Yeah, so we founded it as a nonprofit. Last year, we are now 501c3 status with the IRS. And so we kind of had this hard decision point around going nonprofit, for-profit. Obviously, a lot of tech companies go the for-profit direction. In some ways, we see ourselves as this efficiency product for humanitarian services for, a population, a demographic of 25 million. But at the end of the day, the problem that we wanted to solve was, that Syrian mother who can't tell the doctor her son is allergic to penicillin, or those refugees who are capsized in the Mediterranean, and the NGO trying to save them needs to call the Turkish Coast Guard right then and there. So there's sort of a disaster response component to what we wanted to try and achieve. And for me, it was like, if we can achieve something at that level of scale and that level of quality for the humanitarian space, that's the kind of project, that's the kind of company that I want to build for the rest of my life. Like, I could devote my entire life working on that kind of humanitarian problem, as opposed to trying to turn a profit or being beholden to investors or being basically trying to follow the standard model that a Silicon Valley company takes. In my mind, the challenge, the coolest part of Tarjimly was trying to do something different that shows you can build an amazing, successful company at scale with millions of users, but also have a really good social impact focus and do extremely well with that. Examples of this are like Wikipedia or Khan Academy, who are themselves nonprofit. And I think that's the kind of place that we can be ultimately.
Yeah, I think for some people out there may not be aware, there's this emerging sector between the for-profit and the nonprofit sectors, which have traditionally been further apart, that's coming together in the form of B Corps and social enterprise organizations. And it almost, in some cases, like your organization, doesn't matter whether you started as a for-profit or a nonprofit, because you're bringing the best of both worlds together, the kind of innovation, entrepreneurship, social enterprise model that you have with for-profit companies, with the nonprofit mission-driven, passion and really, looking at problems that are very tough for traditional for-profit companies to address. So I really admire you for taking that step.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around this. I think that the right way to approach building a technology nonprofit is to be as rigorous as a for-profit tech company. You should hold yourselves to the same standards of meeting exactly what your users needs, knowing their persona, building a good revenue model around that can sustain and grow your organization. All of the elements of building a really good company are still there for a technology nonprofit. It's purely like a sort of a legal vehicle and a tax oriented vehicle that allows you to achieve the great work that you're trying to do, and it allows you to leverage volunteers better, donors better, things like this to support your outcome and your mission. But at the end of the day, we went through all this back and forth about B Corp, about hybridizing, about for-profit models, and I think it was a solemn realization that if we want to be able to own and really serve the refugees and own this organization going forward to serve the people in need the most, then we would want to be a nonprofit for sure. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a revenue model, a way to have NGOs support the organization, CSR support it, and even volunteers around the world support the organization.
Great. Well, I think there's some really amazing innovation going on in Silicon Valley in this kind of space. And I don't think that many people realize, Silicon Valley, if it were a country, it would be like the 11th wealthiest country on earth. And that 37% of Silicon Valley are foreign born, and something like 74% of the computer and mathematical workers in Silicon Valley are, foreign born. I myself am married to a foreign born and still a foreign national. And her father was recruited to Silicon Valley, back in the days of, Fairchild Industries. So right at the beginning. And so the contributions of talent to Silicon Valley and really building it from the ground up have been there right from the beginning. And of course, that's not history that's unique to Silicon Valley. That's the history of the United States.
Yeah.
And so the irony in the current, political environment, the sort of the fears and divisions that are being created are really false ones. They couldn't be further from the historical truth of how the United States has been built as a country. I'm here in San Francisco. I look at the Golden Gate Bridge, which was designed by a German immigrant, and almost everywhere you look, you're going to see the imprint of so many cultures coming to the United States and making it what it is today. So there's some real ironies going on there. Tarjimly, maybe you could go into a little bit more. I mean, you have introduced it, but how it's a game changer. I think it's much more than an app. Everyone's heard of an app, and you're really talking about building a global network and bringing people together in a way that fosters social change. And so it's really a kind of the marriage of technology and community building. I've been on the nonprofit side my whole life, and community building has been my forte, if you will. But it's really impressive to see technology come forward and step up and find a new way to build community, which is really a significant accomplishment. So maybe you could share a little bit about what your technology does. Like, I think you've provided some examples in the past of how refugees, certain situations where volunteers were brought together with refugees on other parts of the planet to solve a problem.
Yeah, so you hit it perfectly. This is kind of the core thesis that we realized was what has some ways hampered the humanitarian space and the nonprofit space for a while, which is that usually they only look at community solutions, and then tech companies will only look at technology solutions. So what we really were trying to do was make this blend of a community and technology solution with Tarjimly. So today, our 8,000 volunteers are in 95 different countries and speak over 80 different languages. And they've helped over 15,000 refugees in extremely critical scenarios, basically when nobody else was available. So what we wanted to create was an application that would be the world's most accessible translator service in the world. The idea here was to take any bilingual in the world, be able to onboard them, train them, show them how to be a good translator and interpreter, and connect them in real time when a refugee or an NGO makes a request for a translator and interpreter. An example of this was actually our first session that ever happened on the platform, which was like that moment where I was like, we're doing something right, was when an Iraqi woman at a trauma center, there was this trauma center in Greece with 25 Iraqi and Syrian women, and the trauma center counselor there, couldn't speak to any one of them. She was a volunteer from LA. She only spoke English. And imagine trying to do your job as a trauma counselor and you can't even speak to the people that you're trying to help. And so she was there for 6 months volunteering in the center. And she ended up using Tarjimly to connect with a volunteer translator on demand in Farsi, Pashto, Arabic, Kurdish, whatever she needed. She could get that interpreter to talk with these women about miscarriage that they had, or harassment that they faced in the camps, or food insecurity, or depression, and she could have those conversations with them. And this is a place where it's like, yes, we live in a world where we need to have very high quality vetted interpreters and translators who can be part of this mission, but we also need to open the aperture to significantly more people if that service would be completely unmet. Our thesis with Tarjimly today is that it is the perfect solution when you have nobody else available. Like, imagine you don't have any other option, then basically anyone who decently speaks that language well is able to help you on some levels and can be a big benefit for you in real time. So what we do is we have a Facebook Messenger application today, which you can send a message to Tarjimly. You say, I'm a refugee, I speak this language. The whole application will be in that language. And then when you send a request for, say, English, then we ping all of our pool, not our entire pool, but we ping a pool of our volunteer translators that speak that language. This is where we're actually using machine learning matching to figure out who's the best person available. Part of figuring out like which is the range of volunteer translators and interpreters that are good is developing a scoring model for all those users based on their availability, their reported proficiency, their reviews and ratings and feedback that we get from other translators and the sessions that they've done. We use all of that to build this awesome algorithm behind the matching of refugees and people in need with translators. And what's crazy is today, like before Tarjimly, there was basically Google spreadsheets that every organization had themselves. And there was Facebook groups, and there's just like this hodgepodge of whatever, of like just things on the internet to sign up and help people, versus making a very clean solution to solve this for any NGO, any organization. Like, why does Doctors Without Borders spend any time worrying about translators and interpreters? Like, that's not their business. Like, their job should be focusing on medicine and health and helping people in need, because that's what they do best. So this is kind of where Tarjimly is falling in now, not just for the refugees and accessibility for them across the world, but also the humanitarian organizations who are like, we don't want to be in the business of managing an interpreters and translation department in our NGO. It doesn't make sense. We do health and medicine and food and water and these other things. So that's kind of where a lot of this, I think, energy has come from, and also from the side on the translators and from our volunteers, like this cultural energy and this cultural force that's rebounding since the travel ban over the last 2 years, I think is really salient. And I think it's why we've grown into a team of now, we have 25 volunteer engineers on our team. We have 15 advisors in Silicon Valley that are trying to help and support us and bring more people from the Valley into our mission. And that's a big, big focus from us. We've been funded by Y Combinator, by Echoing Green, by Amazon, and hopefully more to come. And so our goals over 2019 now is actually really ambitious. So we have 3 big goals. One is to register 1 million volunteers to help refugees globally, and help 100,000 refugees globally by the end of next year. By the end of 2019, we think we can register 1 million people to be part of this mission. Wow. And ideally, the goal there is to show the world that the currency of human beings isn't money, it's compassion. It's like, why does anyone sign up to spend 30 minutes or an hour to volunteer their time and help these refugees? They're doing it. There's 8,000 of them doing it right now. And they thank us. They thank us when they spend an hour talking on the phone to help that Congolese woman who didn't have an interpreter available for her asylum interview with a immigration attorney. They thank us for the opportunity to spend an hour to help that refugee in need. The second goal we have is to actually expand the user base using CSR employee volunteering. So like if Google or Amazon or Facebook or Twilio or any of these companies want to sign up all of their bilingual employees as a volunteering program, this is a great opportunity to formalize that. And NGOs that need premium features and certified translators, by partnering with those organizations. And so we're partnering with some really interesting names that I haven't finished settling yet, but I'll announce those next year, hopefully when the partnerships are finalized. And the third goal is to launch a paid refugee translator program where we actually work on solutions to sustainably improve and empower economically the lives of refugees by saying, hey, you are now moved to Germany and you speak German, Arabic, English, like you could get a paid opportunity to help that organization that's in Germany trying to communicate with the other 30 or 50 refugees that they're helping. And you could be a paid refugee translator on our platform. And so that's part of the ethos of like, yeah, we could go build Uber for translators and have any consumer and anybody use our platform. But is that really the exciting part of the market? I think the exciting part of this is being able to empower refugees. And so that's why we want to keep our sort of mission and our ethos aligned on that. So those are our 3 big goals going forward.
Well, that's impressive. You've answered my next question already in part with your 3 big goals, but what do you see as like the big issues and trends? I mean, there's the obvious fact that the displaced people and refugees, the numbers are increasing. But what are you seeing in the next year, issues and trends that are affecting refugees? Clearly, your platform is addressing a huge need that's out there, but what's on your radar? What are the big kind of concerns or red flags you're seeing that, really are concerning you?
The 2 biggest the 3 biggest problems I feel that have been coming to mind where I feel we're closest to play in are interpretation and translation, which is what we're doing today. Mental health support is like absurd. It's like, if you go to a refugee camp like Moria, it's like maybe 90% of refugees need, mental health support or psychological services, and 1 or 2 people are available once a month to come to the entire camp of like 8,000 people. So psychological support, mental health support, and maybe that's at a level of like community support. Maybe it's just having someone to talk to, having someone to be there. Maybe it doesn't have to be a formal, there's definitely need for formal mental health support, but also like what of community support, where I know, for example, in my community, there's people who are elderly or they're, They reset, like a grandmother, for example, like my grandmother resettles in this country, doesn't speak a word of English. If she didn't have her kids around her or grandkids around her all the time, she'd feel extremely lonely and she'd feel extremely like isolated from the community, I think. The third is language learning and language education, which is like its own whole huge market in and of itself. But I wonder if we are to truly help refugees in need, part of it's not just interpreting and translating for them in real-time scenarios, it's helping them become self-sufficient. And so language learning, we could develop a model where volunteers spend 30 minutes or an hour every week training and teaching a refugee in a language, or just practicing the language. It doesn't even have to be maybe a formal setup. The other big megatrend that I'm seeing, which is a problem for the humanitarian space, which is that a lot of the more conservative right-wing governments and institutions that are being formed, not just in the US, but in Europe, are seeing a huge depletion of funds towards immigration, refugee causes, support services for these communities, which means the NGOs that are doing amazing work are being gutted because they don't have the money to now pay for interpreters and translators on demand and have huge budgets and be able to expand and grow. They're basically scraping by now. And so that budgetary concern is another place where Tarjimly has a huge potential value. It's like you pay $120 an hour for an interpreter or the phone, or you pay like $10, $20 using Tarjimly, for example. It's something like this is very, very achievable and possible in the near future, especially as we grow into potentially 1 million volunteers. And I think the cultural trend of, I think we're going to see a rebound pretty soon. I think we're going to see that people are going to remember why immigrants, why refugees, why these people who sacrifice everything and leave everything behind to come to this country and build something for themselves and build something to improve the country are worth it. They're worth investing in. They're worth actually spending the time and giving them the resources, providing the language education. All of these things make a huge positive net outcome on the society as a whole. We see that in Silicon Valley, and my hope is to bring even more of that out in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley in and of itself is not a super diverse place, and we need to improve that. And I think part of it's recognizing the impact that immigrants have, and then just the general trend of diversity has on outcomes that shape and improve society at large.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of diversity at the bottom in Silicon Valley, but not a lot at the top. And hopefully that's changing.
Yeah.
You mentioned resources. So number one, volunteers. People can just go to your website. I speak Spanish and English, so I could go to your website. I could sign up and become a volunteer, correct?
Correct, yep.
And then also you're a nonprofit and you accept donations. And I noticed on your site you frame those donations in very clear ways. So, $20 will fund X and $50 will fund, 3 times X, but you really lay it out, I think.
Yeah. So the translations basically, or sessions and hours translated effectively. We have a very small budget as a nonprofit. Our whole goal is to solve as much as we can with technology. Most of our budget is centered around the software development that allows us to get these volunteers in front of refugees and NGOs in need. And today we still have more demand than we have supply. So we definitely need people to sign up. If you speak any language, sign up on our Facebook Messenger app. And our mobile app will be launching in January, at the end of January. So I'm super excited by that. I think that's how we're going to get to 1 million. I think that's where we want to make a big splash and a lot of noise in a larger tech community and the global community, and say, look, if you're bilingual, you should be on this platform. And part of that is also the funds to support launching the platform and development. We're still raising about 100K, which you can contribute to on our website to donate to support the launch of that mobile app. And in my mind, I think we can give every refugee in the world access to an interpreter or translator on demand if they need it. So I think it's a worthwhile investment. And our goal is ultimately to help. I think if I look at the long-term success of Tarjimly over the next 3 to 5 years, I want to help 1 million refugees at $1 a refugee. I think that's like the most exciting, interesting economics and impact of scale imaginable. And I think we can really achieve that with an application service that has maybe 10 million volunteers on the platform as well. And if you think about 3 billion bilinguals in the world, that's a very, very, very achievable number relative to the number of bilinguals there are. Yeah. And really every language becomes useful at some level, because I mean, I know I know refugee or resettlement organizations in China that are trying to use our service, right? So like Chinese to English can be useful as well. So like there's a lot of overlap when it comes to the language. What we want to do is get as many bilinguals to sign up as possible, and ultimately start to see if Tarjimly can become the remote services, remote volunteer framework and setup for humanitarian services. And I think this is a bit of an extended vision for us, but why not deploy medical professionals, legal professionals, mental health support services, language tutors? Why not deploy more people remotely to provide these services? And I think language is the key blocker for a lot of organizations that have tried to do this. A lot of organizations are like, yeah, we want to provide education to 1 million refugees. Well, all of our materials in English. What do we do? So like, there's a lot of this issue around, if you unmask language as a blocker and you can solve this problem, now you can put a doctor who wanted to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders but can't fly to Greece or doesn't speak Arabic. You can put them with an Arabic interpreter in the same conversation with a refugee or with the medic on the ground who's helping a line of refugees. And I think just this efficiency problem of humanitarian services and what you can do by connecting people remotely is the most exciting thing long-term for Tarjimly as well.
Well, I think the, kind of wrapping things up, I mean, just the process of translating is in itself transformational. I'm an artist, and part of my work involves translating ideas across different cultures, ideas like even love, or you mentioned compassion. I could envision, I've done so much community organizing where you could have, every church in the US or temple or mosque could have, a presentation online with somebody helping to translate a refugee in a foreign country and helping. I think one of the issues is that a lot of people don't really understand who refugees are and what's actually going on the ground in their worlds. They're not coming here or going to other countries because they want to grab our resources. They're fleeing, persecution, violence, war, etc. And if you can somehow bring those people and their stories into the living rooms or into the faith-based settings or into work settings so that people can get a deeper understanding of what's going on. And I think translators will obviously be key in being able to do that. So it's sort of a video conferencing way of bringing refugees into our living rooms versus the sound bites and the horrible, kind of mass media version of the global refugee crisis. You rarely feel good at the end of one of those stories where I think you could actually bring refugees into people's homes and people's lives in ways that we don't currently have access to.
You're absolutely right. I mean, humanizing the story is a big part of our focus. Within our mobile app, we're going to have a community tab where we will share stories of refugees, of translators and how they've helped refugees. And I think that ideally for me is like, look, even if you're not bilingual, if you download this app and you are staying in touch with the stories we're publishing every 2 weeks or 3 weeks on the application, you'll be able to learn more about how the life of a refugee's changes, how the issues that they faced, the impact that they can have on the new country that they have belonged to. And I feel like sharing stories within our community framework will be really impactful as well. So I agree with you. In fact, if we can get refugees in touch with communities here in the United States to be able to share their story, that's one of the biggest, most impactful things. My hope is to use, again, the internet, social media to really turn that to a level of scale. And I think there's a constant online battle between, the anti-immigration, pro-immigration, and anti-refugee, pro-refugee framework online. But I think it's more important that that conversation does play out than not, because otherwise we live in silos of everyone who agrees with everyone. And I think it's like good to be able to push the narrative and the conversation forward ultimately. For me, like, I'm really like, at Tarjimly, we have these 3 core values that we stick to. And I want to share that with you and in the audience too, which is that for us, the work and the reason I do this work is because I believe in these 3 values, which is that the right to be understood is a universal human right. The second is that humanitarian services shouldn't be denied to anyone because of the language that they speak. And the third is that technology needs to work with communities to build trust. And this last one is particularly important for us because the community can't do much without the technology, and the technology can't do anything without the community. So we kind of are trying our best to bridge those 2 and put them together in something new, something different. So if we hold true to these three values, I think we can add a lot of impact on the refugee space and really make a big difference in people's lives.
Well, as I mentioned, the next One Journey Festival is in Washington, D.C. in June 2019 at the National Cathedral. We've invited Tarjimly, and we have a very special focus on technology this year, this coming year, and technology and how it can impact refugees' lives. And we were delighted to discover you, and you recently were a keynote speaker at our San Francisco Bay Area launch. And we're just really excited to get to know you and the work that you and your team are doing. And we're really inspired, and the values that you just shared, I think, really go right to the core of why we're interested in technology and refugees. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Wolfram. I appreciate it a lot.
All right. Thank you so much. Oh, and if people want to sign up and volunteer or donate, what's the website?
www.tarjimly.org. You can go to that website and you can donate, sign up. You can reach out to me directly if you want to volunteer on our team. If you're an engineer or in marketing or PR, this would be really helpful to help us out. And these are the three big things you can do to help us and support us.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks again.
Thanks.